Shang-Chi is the first of many Phase 4 movies and shows that I call their Hindenburg projects. The first half of this movie is the MCU at its best. I was crying within minutes at the beauty of the fight between Wenwu and Ying Li. Then there's the awesome bus scene, followed by the nightclub scene where Abomination, Wong, and the Widow Program all get shoutouts, followed by the absolutely gorgeous fight between Shang-Chi and the Death Dealer. I felt like a kid in a candy shop. The second half of the movie, I was forced to slowly watch and do nothing as it tragically ruined almost every good thing about the film, and every time I see it, it breaks my heart. Shang-Chi's character arc is extremely muddled and inconsistent. It's partly about him discovering his purpose in life, partly about him learning not to blame himself for his father's abuse, partly about him learning not to blame himself for his mother's death, partly about him learning to embrace the light and dark of his parents to form something new, and partly about him learning to face the mistake of leaving his sister. Any one of these could have been a compelling arc for Shang-Chi, but aside from that last one, each of these is brought up one or two times out of nowhere, and none of them get really resolved by the end of the movie, where everything is thrown out of the window for the spectacle of a giant kaiju fight. By the end, I guess he does learn to discover his purpose in life, but only in the sense that he now has superpowered rings that make him an Avenger. I mean, literally, that's the full circle moment where he comes back to his friends and is able to prove that he's changed. Not because he's learned anything, but because he has badass powers now and his life is way cooler than theirs. Learning to embrace the light of his mother and the dark of his father sounds nice, but doesn't actually mean anything in the context of the narrative. His father's ambition and his mother's restraint, his father's calculated strategizing and his mother's on-the-spot flexibility and improvisation. In actuality, the only place where it almost means something is his combat style, where he combines the 10 rings of his father with his mother's style of fighting. But isn't that just his mother's style of fighting, given that she controlled the 10 rings too? And moreover, the fact that he's able to master her fighting style to the point where he mimics their exact fight beat for beat and steals the rings after one training session with his aunt is laughable. And then, after having the rings for a few minutes, he defeats the beast that is so powerful that these people have lived here for thousands of years just to guard it. It's ridiculous. Speaking of ridiculous, this movie is a masterclass on how to set up arguably the most interesting and intimidating villain in the entire MCU, and then how to ruin him completely, all in the span of 2 hours. Wenwu is terrifying, largely because of Tony Leung's masterful performance. The idea of a ruthless warlord who has lived for hundreds of years in search of power, choosing to give up everything to fall in love and have children, only to have his wife murdered, causing him to return to his life of cruelty, is still probably the best setup for any MCU villain. Even by watching him sit at a table and talk, you can feel a millennium of conquest in every word, every calculated motion. His search for power is not angry or lustful, but cold and deliberate, efficient, just as likely to kill you as he is to offer you a drink and hear your perspective, depending on whichever benefits him most. But all of this is thrown out of the window for yet another misunderstanding plot. Having the entire conflict of the movie be based not on a battle of convictions, but on the fact that he's been made the pawn of some other, much less interesting antagonist, which draws its strength not from its characterization, but because it's a big, bad, scary demon guy, is the worst possible move. To this day, I really can't wrap my head around it. We set up this amazing character, Wenwu, and then immediately make him a foolish pawn to some stupid monster. Wenwu goes out like a loser, having his soul sucked out by a demon because he was too stupid to see through its deception. And the movie spends so much time on CGI nonsense that his final moments of recognizing his folly and accepting that the best way to honor his wife's memory was by being a good father to their children gets no time at all. I will never get over how they treated Wenwu. This was the moment when I realized we're in the MCU Dark Ages. Katy is very funny, but she also suffers from a third act that's more interested in dragons than it is stories. What's the deal with dragons anyway? Knowing everything the movie has taught us about this character, having her learn to shoot an arrow and then be good at it the very next day would have been an insult to our intelligence, even if by good at it they just meant was really helpful in the fight against the demons. But having her actually shoot the impossible shot to hit the big bad, saving Shang-Chi and the world, is beyond offensive. I like that they made a character whose arc is about finding her purpose in life, but they messed up because they forgot to establish that she's good at basically anything at all. For example, they could have at least established that she was, I don't know, a fast learner of all subjects in school, but didn't have enough motivation to commit to anything. That way, learning to shoot the arrows in a day could be seen as totally in her wheelhouse, and her arc becomes about fighting nihilism and learning to care about something. I basically just made that up off the top of my head, but you get the idea. Instead, we're left with this, where like Shang-Chi, she suddenly develops superhuman aptitude so she can help fight a big demon, and her only growth revolves around the fact that she did badass things that she can brag to her friends about. I will say they did establish that she's a good driver, which came in handy during like 3 different sequences, so for that at least I can say well done. Okay, Xialing is pretty awesome. Her backstory is heartbreaking. The scene in the arena where we watch the flashback of him promising to come back, followed by her swift kicking him, knocking him out cold, is some of the best character work the MCU has to offer. And then in the very next scene, her first line is telling Katy that she loves her pants. This lets us know that she's a badass, but she's also pretty chill and down to earth, which makes her vendetta against Shang-Chi much more interesting than if she were just some evil asshole.
It was 6 years. That's how long it took me to realize I didn't need him anymore.
Is a great line that is powerfully delivered. And her journey to accepting him as a brother and defining her own self-worth independent of her father actually feels pretty well realized. If I did have one note, it would be that I wish the movie leaned into her gray morality a bit more. Her ultimate goal is to build an empire that rivals the strength of her father. That's unequivocally not a noble goal. Even if girls are allowed in, she's still trying to build an empire. And if there's one thing that history teaches us, it's that you don't build an empire with kindness. You build it by stepping on others and clawing your way through the top through pure power. And that's okay. It's cooler if she walks away an anti-hero. She goes out of her way to kill a guy in her first action scene. She shouldn't be stopping just short of people's necks in the finale. She should be stomping motherfuckers out. It differentiates her from the rest of the heroes and sets the stage for potential future conflicts. And if there's anything you've gleaned from this video thus far, I hope it's that I love a situation where people are forced to choose between their loved ones and their ideals. Trevor is hilarious, but he's much more comic relief than he is a character with an arc. But that's not the end of the world. We do get an explanation for why he was the Mandarin and a bit of redemption for him, which for a throwaway character is well above the curve for Marvel. Trevor, I approve.